Welcome. This is the Planning and Land Use Management Committee. I'm Councilmember Weezar, being joined by Councilmember Mitch Englander. Is staff ready? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Item number 4. Is there no cards we could approve on consent? Okay, we'll hold that item. Item number 5. There's no cards. We'll approve that on consent with no objection. Item number 6. There's no cards. We'll approve that on consent. Item number 7. Approve on consent. Item number 8. We will approve on consent. Item 10. We could approve on consent. Item 11, we have some cards. All right, so we could begin the agenda and start with our commissioners. Go to item 1.
Item 1, Councilman, is the communication from the mayor relative to the reappointment of Jeremy Irvine to the Cultural Heritage Commission.
All right. Welcome. This is a reappointment, and you have been on this for some time. Just want to share anything with the committee, anything you've learned?
I've learned a lot. Had a great time on the committee, and I'm looking forward to continuing my service.
Oh, great. Okay. You're a CD5 resident?
Yes.
Yeah, which is the best district?
Which is the best district?
Yeah.
CD1.
CD1. Okay.
Right?
I move that we table this item, Mr. Chair, for at least another couple years.
No, thank you. We've gone through this process, and we just wanted to reconfirm and thank you for your service and for the work you've been doing. I think we are seeing a lot more activity in this commission, and that's a good thing. And the attention to detail you guys have displayed is very helpful to us. So
I can't take all the credit for that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, and Council District 14 is in the top 3, okay?
Absolutely.
It's not number 1, as you said in CD1 is, but it's
12, something else, and then 14.
Thank you. So we'll move this item with no objection. It's in council when?
Tomorrow, sir.
See you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Item number 2.
Item 2 is a communication from the mayor relative to the reappointment of Kimberly Chemerinsky to the Central Area APC.
Hi, and welcome. You were here not too long ago as well.
Yes.
And you are being reappointed to the Central Los Angeles Area Planning Commission. Thank you for your service, and also a CD5 resident. I see CD5 is doing very well today. But thank you. Anything you want to share with the committee, or anything you see there's a disconnect between area planning commissions and this committee and the city, or anything you want to share with us?
It's been a privilege to serve on the Central Area Planning Commission, and I look forward to continuing my service.
Thank you. Any questions, comments?
Thank you.
This item, thank you. And this is up tomorrow as well?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. And say hello to my friends over at Alston Bird.
I'll be sure to do so. Thank you.
All right. Ordered, no objection. We will now go to item number 9. We have Councilmember Koretz here. So, Mr. Koretz, is he here? Okay. Welcome, Mr. Koretz. We are on item number 9. If you could just allow our CLA to read that into the record.
Item 9, Councilman, is a report from the Cultural Heritage Commission relative to the inclusion of Norm's Coffee Shop as a historic cultural monument.
Welcome, Mr. Koretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. This is certainly really important to me and to my district, but I think as the city as a whole as well. This, I think, would be one of the most dramatic losses of a historic property in the city's recent history. We just avoided such with the Proud Bird getting released for 20 years, which I thought would have been the most tragic loss since the Brown Derby many years ago. I would consider this to be the same. Norm's is probably the best example of Googie coffee shop architecture left in the city. It is a great gathering place and a great restaurant, and I would hope not only that we're able to preserve the physical site, but I'd certainly encourage us to preserve the restaurant, although this committee does not have that purview as well. I know the community in the area around the airport certainly made it clear they didn't just want to save the Proud Bird and then have it become a McBird or something else to fill the space. They wanted to preserve the space, the business, and all the goodwill and community feel that goes with it. And Norm's is a great community institution. I have my own bias because I've been eating there for 50 years. But just about every celebrity, just about every famous athlete, just about every rock star that has come through LA at one time or another has eaten at Norm's. And many of them have very strong feelings about Norm's continuing. And so I hope we will look at this great community institution, what a terrible loss it would be. We've had a few other recent losses like Jan's Restaurant and Twain's in Studio City, but this is the best. It's a community gathering place like no other, and it is a piece of architecture like no other. And don't forget that Norm originally claimed that he invented the patty melt, so in the 40s or 50s. So I hope that you will consider making this a historic landmark, because it absolutely is one, and would be one of the greatest losses during my lifetime. So I think it's very important to preserve it, and I thank you for your consideration.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can we get staff up, please?
Yes, good afternoon. Ken Bernstein with the Department of City Planning Office of Historic Resources. The Cultural Heritage Commission did recommend approval of the Historic Cultural Monument nomination for Norm's La Cienega. This was built in 1956 and is a Googie-style restaurant that's been in continuous operation as Norm's since its opening. The Commission found that Norm's met 3 of the Historic Cultural Monument criteria. First, that it reflects the broad cultural, economic, or social history of the community as the long-term location of a locally based coffee shop chain that contributed to the commercial identity of Los Angeles. Second, as an excellent example of Googie-style architecture. And finally, as a notable work of a master architect due to its design by the architects Arme and Davis, who are among the preeminent architects of the Googie style. So with all 3 criteria met, the Commission unanimously recommended designation.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you said you met 3 of the 4.
At 3 of the 4
It's
criteria.
required to meet 1.
Right.
One, right?
Correct.
And I missed it. Which one did it not meet?
Let's see. It did not meet any association with historic persons or events. That would be the one that it, but
Every celebrity has been...
could make the case, potentially.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have 2 cards. The first is the owner, and then we have the owner's representative. Michael Colonna and DJ Moore. Now, you could have a total of 5 minutes, or you could have one person speak for 5 minutes and then the other one for 1 minute, however you'd like.
I'll clarify in a second. We're the owner of the restaurant business. We're the gentleman representing the landlord. So we're separate entities.
Oh, I see. I had these cards mixed up. Okay, well, go ahead. You have you are Michael Colonna, right?
Mike Colonna.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. I just want to thank the committee, all the council members that have been involved in the project, especially Councilmember Paul Koretz, who just spoke recently. And has been
Move the
very
microphone down just a bit so we can hear you. Thank you.
Who's been very active in all the events and supporting us. The Cultural Heritage Commission, the staff at the Conservancy, and I do want to take a second to thank the 80-plus employees at the restaurant. And as president of Norm's, I represent over 1,600 co-workers. And I think the first step, which we have here is to protect the building and protect the site so that we can preserve some of the ambiance and some of the feel of what this restaurant and the Googie architect has done for the community. I'm a born and raised Boston boy, transplanted to California about 30 years ago. So these issues are all over the country, and Boston has a great historical feeling and sense to it, and I think it's a struggle for all communities in terms of how do you grow, yet how do you maintain the culture that made the community what it is. So I simply want to say thank you. I hope that the consideration moves forward. Our intent would be to stay in business at the restaurant, to work with the landlord, and resolve any relationships so that we could remain there in a long term and serve the community as we have been doing for many, many years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. DJ Moore?
Good afternoon, honorable council members. DJ Moore of Latham & Watkins, representing the property owner, Norman Cienega Property Group, LLC. As Mr. Kalana mentioned, there are two entities involved, the Norm's business that operates at the site as well as the underlying landowner. And the landowner just wanted me to come here and convey that they do not object to the Cultural Heritage Commission's recommended historic cultural monument designation for the Norm's building, and is looking forward to working with the city and stakeholders to preserve the building. There are no current plans to demolish the building, and the ownership is continuing to explore potential development options for the property that allow the building to be preserved while ensuring the fair use of the property by the owner. We're looking forward to having discussions with the city and stakeholders to achieve a win-win result, and currently the ownership is working closely with architects and historic preservation experts to evaluate the property, but no concept plans have been finalized. When they are, the ownership does plan on engaging in a significant outreach effort both with the city and the stakeholders to discuss next steps. In the meantime, we understand that the historic cultural monument process has a timeline, and respect that process and understand it must continue to move forward while the future options for the site are being evaluated, and we look forward to discussing those options with the public once they're ready. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So with that public testimony and the report from our staff, I would recommend we move this item forward. So agreed by Mr. Englander. So ordered. Thank you. Now, let's go back to item number 11. I believe, 11, we have no cards. We could approve that on consent. Number 11 on consent. Can you read that into the record, please?
Sure. Item 11 is a report from the Planning Commission. It's to amend queue conditions for a mixed-use project that will have 450 units in CD14.
Thank you. Item number 3.
Item 3.
Ordered. On item number 11. Item number 3 now.
Item 3, Councilman, is a city attorney prepare ordinance relative to the LAX Supplemental Use District.
Thank you. Now, we heard this presentation in Plum before, so we don't have to go through the whole presentation. We did give some direction from this committee on some report backs, and it wasn't clear whether those report backs were brought back into within the report. Amongst them, hold on one second. We heard this in September, and there was a complaint by one current stakeholder, Regency Outdoor. This committee asked Alawa to meet with Regency to try to work out the issue. Does anybody have an update on those discussions?
Lisa Trifoletti on behalf of the Los Angeles World Airports. I am the Division Director for the Environmental Land Use Planning. Our commercial development group has committed to and has continued to have ongoing negotiations with Regency. Want to make sure that we recognize for the record that the lease agreement that the Regency folks are seeking with the airport are really separate and distinct from the land use issue before you, but they have continued meeting. They are working out negotiations, and it's something that I cannot speak to personally, but I could answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, so those discussions are still ongoing.
They're very active.
Okay,
yes.
because some issues were raised, well, potential litigation, and we just didn't want to jump into this and approve it without seeing that there could possibly be something worked out. So we just want to know that those discussions and negotiations are going on. Okay, all right. Thank you. We have a number of speakers here.
If I can ask the city attorney, I thought we, and I want to hear from anybody who shows up to speak on this, but just has anything changed significantly?
Yes, I believe there have been a couple of changes requested by the airport, so that's why we need to hold another public hearing.
Just want to make sure we get that on the record. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Lisa spoke. Do you want to give another piece? Sure.
Just wanted to say that this application has been over 4 years in the process. We've done a tremendous amount of public outreach with our FAA federal partners, our council office, local community groups, Coalition to Ban Billboard Blight. We have, per your direction, been engaging with the Regency, and we feel that the sign district is one that will help LAX with its modernization program. We're in the midst of a major modernization program right now. We have aging infrastructure, a new facelift program, a mandate to have a people mover system connect to our regional rail and new off-airport transportation, and this program is part of that. So we think that this is something that we've been very cognizant of including a number of project design features. We have 18 project design features designed to protect the public and aviation safety. We're considerate of adjacent residential areas. We're consistent with the LAX specific plan, which contemplated the sign district would supersede the LAMC, and we have a creative sign program that will enhance the passenger experience. So we really respectfully request that that you please approve the application today.
Okay, thank you. Don Duckworth.
Yes, members of the Commission, my name is Don Duckworth. I'm the Executive Director of the Westchester Town Center Business Improvement District. That is the business improvement district that encompasses all of the commercial properties to the north of the airport along Sepulveda up to Manchester. We strongly support this proposed district. We believe that it is intended to and will bring well-designed signage into the airport area that enhances the overall program of signage at the airport and is an integral part of the modernization of the airport, which is an important priority for the city and the business improvement district. This process has gone on for a number of years. There's been a tremendous outreach. The bid is strongly in support. I know the Chamber of Commerce has taken positions of support, and also Westchester Vitalization Corporation. We would urge the Commission today to approve this so we could move ahead without delay. Thank you.
Thank you. Dennis Hathaway.
Good afternoon. I'm Dennis Hathaway. I'm president of the Coalition to Ban Billboard Blight. I've spoken here before about our opposition in principle to selling or placing commercial advertising signs in public facilities and on public property. I've also spoken about concerns about the digital signs on the parking structures, the ones that change every 8 seconds. I think it's really irresponsible to put those right in that very heavy mix of of traffic in the terminal loop. But I'm also realistic enough to know that a sign district in some form is going to be approved. And I'm here to urge you actually to approve the current version, because it has one very important element for us, and that is the requirement that billboards be removed in the surrounding communities. I've spoken to people in the community, leaders. They support this. This is be removal of blight. It's very important, and I urge you to proceed with it. Thank you.
Thank you. John Roland.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is John Rulin. I'm president of the Westchester Streetscape Improvement Association. We're the group that's revitalizing the Sepulveda Boulevard leading to the airport. We've heard many complaints about some of the design that the airport has done, but I have never heard any complaint at all about the signage program that's being talked about today. We were recently in Miami airport, and I got off the plane, went into the building to go through customs, and it was a beautiful new building, great signing, very clear, the directions and everything. And I said to my wife, why can't LAX look like this? I think this is the first step in getting to that point where we can look like that, or even better than what that airport looked like. So I urge your support for it, and that can be done very quickly, and so that we can get on with beautification of the airport. So thank you very much. I've submitted letters for your records as well.
Thank you. Victor de la Cruz.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Victor de la Cruz, Manat, Phelps & Phillips, on behalf of Regency Outdoor Advertising. At a previous meeting, this committee asked staff to work with my client on resolving issues related to Regency's billboards at the LAX Park 1 property before moving forward with this sign district. To date, no progress has been made, as the lease draft Regency provided to LAWA has not been returned with comments. Clearly, our efforts to resolve the lease issues and this committee's direction have gone ignored. To try something new, I would respectfully suggest a dual path while we try to work on this lease. We would like to work with CD11, LAWA staff, and the planning department to explore out-of-the-box solutions. We have very legitimate concerns that LAWA to date has not addressed. For example, would takedown of Regency billboards be used to supply sign credits to our competitors? Why is there no language on this in the SUD? It'd be the height of unfairness if our competitors would be allowed to put up new signs at LAWA using credits from Regency billboards. These are not separate and distinct issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tricia Keene.
Good afternoon. As you know, the LAX Sign District has been before your committee several times now. The revised version of the ordinance that is before you today, with two very minor additions that I will read for the record, addresses all of our concerns. We continue to support the LAX Sign District, think that it's something that will benefit both the airport and the community, and we are eager to see this move forward to council with the following two additions. At the end of the first paragraph of Section 8A, we'd ask that the following sentence be added. LAWA shall develop the LAX Vicinity Sign Reduction Program in consultation with the Department of City Planning and Council District 11. And in Section 8B2, that should also be revised to include Council District consultation. And as revised, that would read, LAWA shall develop the Visual Blight Reduction Program in consultation with the Department of City Planning and Council District 11, and shall present it to the BOAC for adoption prior to the installation of any off-site signs in the landside sub-area. With those two minor additions, we are in full support of the sign district and hope that it can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, could we get staff up here, please? There are two issues. One issue is, have you seen or heard of the amendments made by Council District, proposed amendments made by Council District 11 right now?
Hello, Craig Weber, City Planning staff. Yes, we are familiar with the requested amendments, and we do recommend proceeding with those amendments. They would need to be represented in a revised report from the city attorney with the ordinance that appears before council for a future vote.
Okay, great. Thank you. And secondly, earlier I asked if there was a resolution to the Regency issue, and our staff said there were negotiations going on. They said nothing's going on. What is going on?
Our commercial development group has continued to meet with Regency. I think the issues, Regency would like to have their lease extended for some billboards that they have on Lawa property for as long as possible, including a number of 10 years. And that particular property, they are a subtenant to a parking operator for the Park One lot. And I think that there's terms, and there's been terms negotiated by our office, the Commercial Development Group, and they have not yet come to a meeting of the mind, but they are in ongoing negotiations, and they really are separate and apart from anything to do with this sign district. It's really complex. We're looking at the development of our whole overall airport program, including the people mover, and the disposition of that property is one that is going to take longer for folks to work out. So they are in negotiations.
Okay. I didn't hear the exact language, but I think it was there's no progress, because this is the way I see this when this was brought up to this committee in September is this is we should move forward with this. We need it. The city needs it. On the one hand. On the other hand, if there is potential litigation, I'm trying to figure out if, in fact, we just disagree with the stakeholder and, okay, well, we got to assess our risks if there is litigation, and we should go into closed session and discuss those. Or if there's negotiation, there's a possible solution. I'm not quite sure which is the correct approach we're taking. So if we're just going to move forward and accept litigation, I'd like to hear about that. I want to know what the risks are. But if it's just negotiations and they're progressing, that's fine. They're going to end at some point, and let's move forward. But I'm not quite sure where we are. Which is it? We just disagree, or are we in discussions? Let's hear the answer from staff.
I don't speak for our Board of Airport Commissioners, and so I believe, if you needed to go into closed session or you wanted to have the city attorney, I don't want to overstate my representation in terms of, but our city attorney has looked at, and I believe the city attorney for the planning department have looked at the legal arguments made today that have been raised, and it would be maybe something that our city attorney could speak to.
Yes, sir. Have you been involved in these discussions?
Well, I'm involved to the extent that I'm involved on sign matters and that I advise your committee. But my understanding is that, as with other sign companies, it's not a day goes by that we don't get, these kind of, I guess, arguments that come our way. So I don't think it's anything out of the ordinary. If you want to look at it that way. I haven't involved specifically in this project. I have not been involved specifically, but one of my colleagues has, and he's also litigated a lot of billboard issues with me, so he's intimately familiar with all of the issues.
Okay.
But I believe, just to answer you more directly, I think some of the arguments that were made by Regency, separate and apart from us renewing the request for us to negotiate and renew our lease, they had made the argument that a zone change is not required, and a zone change is required. But we say that a zone change is not required. The LAX specific plan authorized this process in 2005, over a decade ago, for the LAX zone. And despite creative arguments by Regency attorneys, our city planning department and our city attorney's office have both confirmed that no zone change is necessary and that LAWA is in fact following the correct process. The LAX sign district is a separate and independent ordinance and should not be confused with the request for us to engage with them on a lease extension. They made arguments about consistency with city and federal regulation, and it's been confirmed on a number of occasions by our city planning staff and the city attorney's office that we do have a consistent approach with those regulations. We take federal revenue diversion very seriously. seriously. We've worked with FAA to accommodate their concerns. We've looked at consistency arguments with the city ordinance, and so I think we have spent a lot of time debunking some of the legal arguments raised by Regency, and we feel comfortable coming before you that we can move forward and would stand up in a court of law.
Okay, that is okay. Questions, comments?
Yeah, just a comment. And first and foremost, this is never easy. This has been going on for 19 years. This issue at this location for 19 years that I recall. And in fact, it was then that it was discovered 19 years ago that LAX is one of the only international airports without any type of signed revenue program. At the table when the first RFP came out 19 years ago, it was about 19 years ago, I believe, there was a revenue sharing agreement for like $56 million to the airport. And since then, the industry itself has changed dramatically. That was at the height of the .com, where people were just buying up boards everywhere, spending money like drunken sailors, not just online, but everything was pretty much in print. So it was both in print, newspaper, billboards. The industry has changed dramatically. But the critical thing is the revenue part of it. I'm a firm believer that we can't and nor should we tax our way to prosperity or out of the problems we have. I've looked at the issues that need to be funded at LAX as well. And the fact that every single airport in the world, we're not just talking about the country, but every single airport in the world has different types of programs and revenue sharing agreements structured as this. Oh yeah, except for us. And so with that, while some of it, and not everybody agrees with all of it, and not everybody's on board with all of it, I get it. And in fact, some of the stakeholders, beyond the ones that I mentioned, but some of the ones that I mentioned, I'm very close to, and I get it. But we got to move forward as well at some point, and I think that point's now. In looking at the concerns over, for example, the security issues at LAX that haven't been funded. It was back in the day when Mayor Reardon at the time had a plan which was legal, to divert about $50 million out of the airport into the city's general fund to hire police officers. It was supported by the full city council. 14 out of the 15 members at the time supported it. That was after the third RFP, I believe, second or third RFP that didn't go forward. And the FAA jumped in, and as well as a coalition of all the domestic airlines, the ATA, the Air Transport Association, then led by Carol Howlett, and saying that this cost was going to pass on to the landing fees for all the travelers, all the domestic travelers, not international. And that, so basically all of us, all of you, all of our residents would be paying as a supplement to pay to the airport to give back to the general fund and usurp Prop 218, which at the time didn't exist and now does. The FAA then changed their rules and laws and regulations that says you can no longer divert money out of the airport. We've got, and looking at it from a public safety perspective, and in working with LAXPD, a number of initiatives that we've learned, particularly after the last tragedy we just had on the very first day that the council member of that district took office. And somebody in my district who was working for TSA was killed. It's the first TSA agent, in fact. And I'm not tying this to that, but what I am saying is we need resources. We need resources that need to go back into the airport. We need resources to ensure that it's absolutely always the safest airport in the world. We've already, we know from the Blue Ribbon report that came out, some of the things that have to be funded. We know from the special report on the perimeter issues and fencing issues that we just saw a couple weeks ago on 60 Minutes that we've got to look at that as well. And so there's an opportunity for funding here and a partnership and a program that's been lingering under threat of litigation and all these other concerns, which I understand are real, for 20 years. And so in support of the council member that represents that district, I would urge us to move this forward to the full city council. And if there's anything that we should legally do in terms of asking the city attorney to schedule it for the full city council with perhaps the option of going into closed session to address those issues or concerns, that we ask if there's that opportunity, if there's a true threat of litigation that could be measured and what that might be, that we should have that discussion then in closed session, and schedule it and agendize it as such at council. And that would be my recommendation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So could I ask the representative from Regency to come up, please? So earlier you stated there was no progress in the if there's been negotiations. Has there been negotiations? How do you feel this is moving along?
There have
public comment that you stated?
There have been some limited discussions, which I think is what allows LAWA to say that there have been conversations, but an actual negotiation is when the other party returns a lease or provides some comments on the lease. The extent of negotiations, as they're terming it, is, are you ever going to get us comments? When are we going to talk? Those are the scope of the negotiations. What we're asking for now, to the extent that that's a separate department and that they're saying that it's separate and distinct, I'm saying let's try another path, which is to meet with LAWA staff who are working on the sign district ordinance, together with the planning department, together with CD11, and to take a look at the sign district provisions that actually causes a lot of concern. We were hoping to resolve those by entering into a new lease, but if that's not going to happen, then I think we need to have a sit down to just talk about those issues. And I think that that's probably the most expedient way of proceeding forward. I think that we could probably accomplish it in a matter of weeks.
Okay. Well, I don't know the details of this, and I'm not quite sure what are the issues involved, but when these issues were raised at the last meeting, I think they were worthy of requesting some discussions to avoid possible litigation if it does rise to that level. And if in fact there will be litigation, we need to assess that. We need to figure out what are the pros and cons of just voting on it and moving forward, or do we want you guys to? Is there a resolution? I hearing both. I don't know if there is a resolution. I mean, I'll ask again. Is there a possible resolution, or we just disagree and then let's just assess that? If we're going to move in a direction, approve this and move forward.
I'm hopeful that there is a path towards resolution. We were hoping to address it through the lease negotiations. If that doesn't work, then I think we can have that sit down so that we can get certain questions answered. And I think I think the quintessential questions that we have is something that Regency has had communications with the city about before, which is who gets the credits from the takedown of the billboards if that were to ever occur. We are very concerned that if those billboards are taken down, another sign company would then be able to go into LAWA, participate in their sign district program, and put up signs using Regency's billboard credits. And to us, that's the height of unfairness. So what we would like to do is to resolve that particular issue, for example, and get some language into the sign district making it clear that that can't happen. And I'll just quickly say that the proposed citywide sign ordinance that this committee has drafted has language in there saying that the credits go to the billboard companies taking down the signs. But by moving forward with this sign district before the proposed citywide sign ordinance moves forward, you're doing two things that would be completely in conflict. And that's what we would want to be concerned. We want to make sure that the proposed citywide sign ordinance, which expresses this council's current intent, makes it into the proposed sign district as well. And I think that we can have those discussions in the course of a couple weeks.
Great, thank you. Now Lisa, so we've heard from Regency. Do we fundamentally disagree, and let's assess that, or do you think there's room for negotiation and settling this before
I think that
bigger problems?
As the council member mentioned, there's great need at the airport today for revenue that would be unrestricted to help our program. We have, even upon adoption of the sign ordinance, which is, again, it is a separate issue today. But we we have to do a whole lot of work. For example, we are going to be developing detailed design guidelines for the implementation of this.
I don't know the details, and it's a very simple question. Do we just, from what you've heard right now, do we just fundamentally disagree and let's assess our risks, or is there room for negotiation? I don't know. I'm asking.
I think that we would request that you please approve the project today and move this forward to Plum. We don't believe that there is a true risk of litigation, or one that will, and we believe that our commercial development group will continue to work with Regency on a separate and parallel track to find a resolution to the issue, that they are not related.
Okay. I still don't know the risk involved, but okay. City Attorney,
yes.
You haven't been handling this, but somebody else has. I don't know. What's your assessment?
Well, we've been involved all along, and Michael Bostrom, who's been working on the sign district, he keeps me apprised, and so I'm sure he's aware of the arguments that have been made, and we could meet with you in a closed session to discuss those. But I think what I'm hearing from you is you just want to know: is this out of the usual? Is this just a typical set of threats, or is it something so unusual that you want to stop it right now? So I haven't heard anything like that, but we could meet with you in a closed session if you desire it for more detail.
Christopher Coons from the airport.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to mention this action, like any legislative action where there's an applicant and there's the city, the airport actually has to indemnify the general fund against any litigation costs. So while we don't feel that it's a real litigation threat, in the event that litigation did occur, it's actually the airport's proprietary funds that would be on the line, and we would have to cover any general fund costs that the city would incur.
That doesn't make it any better, but okay.
I mean, but I just as far as who bears the risk, it's not the city's general fund that's on the line.
I've just been in some instances where we see issues come up, and we say, let's just move forward. And then later on, we're in this bigger mess, when we could have averted it before. That's all I'm trying to get to. And that's why I asked, is there room for negotiation? If there is, fine, let's do that. If there's not, tell us, and then let's go into closed session and figure this out. I mean, it's very simple.
I believe that the commercial development group right now is working to try to find a resolution, and they're looking at how they can reasonably extend their lease on the site. The problem with that is that that site may be needed for future development and or construction laydown of our critical infrastructure program, that being the People Mover. So I am not personally at liberty to say that there's a resolution, and because the commercial development group is trying to figure all of that out, but there is plenty of time by which they can do that, which is a separate and dual track as we move forward, because the other work that we have to do to actually implement the sign district is, one, we have to do the design guidelines. That takes time. We have to find a consultant to do that. The other we have to do is bring on a third-party media asset manager. So we're going to do a whole procurement process. So we have a ton of work ahead of us before we can even begin to implement the sign district. But by moving forward today, we're able to take those necessary steps, and the direction is noted from the committee that to LAWA to continue to negotiate in good faith with the sign company. And
Thank you. One final shot for you, and then we got to move on. Yes.
I think it's just important for the record to get one question in, and hopefully we can get a response from LAWA staff about this. Keep saying that this is not about the lease. I'm talking about specific issues that are in the sign district ordinance. So my question about the sign district ordinance is, under the sign district ordinance and the provisions that exist for sign credits and the takedowns of signs so that you can put up new signs, can the takedown of Regency billboards be used to put up new signs at the airport? And I'd like to have at least have that question resolved. And I will note also for the record, as far as other issues that we have raised in the past, such as the zone change, In fact, LAWA staff did make changes into the sign district ordinance relative to the zoning that they did not talk about in their staff report. Those changes should have been to the Planning Commission, and they're actionable. Thanks.
Did you hear the question? Do we have an answer for that?
Getting fun. The sign takedown area is fashioned to be an entire West LA community plan. So we have the area going from the 405 freeway on the east, the beach on the west, the Sunset Boulevard, all the way down to Imperial. So the entire West LA area is an approved area under the sign district for us to take down signs. And in no case have we ever identified any signs, including the Regency signs, as the signs that the airport wants to target for takedown. In fact, it is why our commercial development group is trying to figure out an appropriate lease renegotiation with Regency, because we derive revenue from the Regency billboards on our campus. And so we're looking at a whole broad area as where we could be taking down signs. And we still have not heard today, even from Regency, any legal issue that undermines the land use request we have before you.
Okay. Now, Mr. Cedillo has a question, but I have a question. So we heard this item in September with a request from this committee that discussions be had. I'm just kind of concerned that we are raising all these issues here at this committee and, in public when we usually just talk about the merits or non-merits of the project, but yet those negotiations did not go on, or just discussions. It seems to me that there's been some basic questions that haven't been answered.
Council member, having worked for a city council member sitting at Plum, I do make it my number one priority to not have a mess before you at this kind of a committee. And in fact, that is why we have spent the number of years working through all of the issues with the community groups, with the Coalition to Ban Billboard Blight. I think it's very rare you hear somebody like Dennis Hathaway come before you to actually recommending approval in the current form, working with the council office, working with the FAA. When it comes to this issue, the lease renegotiation is one that I could not solve, and I wish I could have, but that is one that we are committed to continuing the negotiation and the conversation with them so we can find a solution. And this one is that I could not solve.
Mr. Cedillo?
I appreciate your hard work. I heard the answer to this question about whether or not if there was going to be a takedown, would it apply? And your response was the size of the zone district, and then some other comments about land use in this, but I didn't get an answer. I didn't hear an answer specifically to the question. Will it be, and I think the question is, will it be treated the same as other takedowns? If I'm correct, sir? Your question is whether or not you will be treated the same as other signs in a takedown.
I think what we're asking for is a yes or no answer to the question of, can our signs be used to put up new signs at the airport? And from our standpoint, that would be incredibly unfair because there are signs, and for another company to then benefit from that would just be wrong. And the airport has never answered that specific question. They keep saying that there's a broad area where signs can be taken down from, but that doesn't answer our question.
Right. Right. I'm just waiting for an answer. Yes or no?
1 second.
I wanted to
you have the answer to that?
specific question. Okay. Yes.
Yes, is that it? Okay, thank you.
The response to that question is, in the revisions that our office asked for to the sign district today, in that LAWA shall develop the LAX vicinity sign reduction program in consultation with city planning and the council district. That was intended to ensure that as signs are identified for takedown in the future, we have the ability to consult with the right departments, have applicants work with have LAWA and other folks work with our office to ensure that we are identifying the correct signs to take down. We're doing it in a way that's fair and equitable, and we're not holding up the LAX modernization process while we wait to identify those signs. So we want to have the ability in the future to properly identify the right signs for takedown. and not specify them in an ordinance, because we don't think that it's necessary to specify them in the specific ordinance, but rather to create the framework for properly identifying those. So that was the reason why we requested that language to be included. And I think that addresses the concern about how to figure out how the sign takedown will happen.
So I heard fair and equitable, and I'm going to trust that that's what you meant.
That is what I meant.
Okay, thank you. And what we're proposing here, is that consistent with what the new ordinance will have in terms of how the takedown provisions are? To our city attorney, are you familiar with our new proposed regulations?
Yes, I've worked on the citywide sign ordinance. I'm not familiar with what they're doing on this sign district, but I just wanted to point out, because it is a separate piece of legislation, they do not necessarily need to be consistent.
In legal terms, yes, it doesn't have to be. For policy-wise,
Yes.
is it consistent?
I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe one of the planners would know. I haven't been dealing with that.
And you know, I'm not saying they have to be consistent. I'm saying if they're not, let's recognize they're not, because there's a grander reason, purpose here. But
All of our standards related to lighting and all of the most recent conditions have been included in the sign district, consistent with recent approvals on sign district. And as far as takedown, we have both a community benefits package that would be $3.75 million to beautification of the areas that are gateway corridors into LAX, Sepulveda, Century Boulevard, Lincoln Boulevard, as well as a 23,000 square feet of signage being taken down. And so, I know that you have not yet adopted the full ordinance, but it does have a substantial takedown component and a beautification package as well.
one final shot, sir, and then you seem kind of eager and anxious over there.
Just one more thing, my apologies. Under the proposed citywide sign ordinance, because this is the question that you've asked, under the proposed citywide sign ordinance, Regency signs could not be used to put up new billboards up at the airport. So the question is, under the sign district ordinance, can Regency's signs be used to put up new billboards at the airport? That question is not being answered. And I'm just hoping that we can have that sit down with LAWA staff, planning department, council offices to figure out these basic questions. And if the answer is no, well then the answer is no, or the answer is yes. But we'd like to at least have some basic answers. The question from the council office about further consultation in the future about which billboards can be used, that's a good start. We're not asking for the specific billboards to be identified that will be used for takedowns. What we're asking for is just a basic policy framework so that we understand how this is going to work. And being evasive is not the right step when you're dealing with the public or billboard companies for that matter.
Yeah, I whether it's this stakeholder or any other stakeholder that is looking for some answers like this, I think that deserves some responses. And for us, I think we need to assess what threat, if any, exists from that. And I'm not comfortable whether, okay, let me see the full picture legally, or even from a public policy point of view. You know, does this or does this not make sense? Whether we're going to just move forward and take our consequences later on. If this was to be moved forward, when would this be in council?
The soonest would be next week, sir.
This would be in next week. Yeah.
That would be the earliest, sir. Would be next Wednesday.
Okay. Oh well, and we're on. If we could next Wednesday, okay. If we could move, I would suggest that we hold this in council 1 week, have a closed session before we vote on this item, and urge the parties to discuss this. I've heard two very specific questions that need answered. And then in closed session, if we disagree, we disagree. And we got to assess the risk associated with that, and we either move forward or we don't. But we need that type of information for ourselves before we move forward.
So you'll keep it in Plum, Councilman, to
1 week?
next week?
Next week.
And then a closed session?
In Plum.
Yes.
And for a little bit of guidance that we would get clear answers, kind of yes and no answers to the takedown and to the questions that have been asked that seem to us seem to be pretty direct. I mean,
perhaps requesting the city attorney, Councilman, to prepare a memo that addresses that.
Clear answers on the questions of the lease and the takedown policy.
Well, that's my suggestion. If we could hold it in Plum 1 week and then have closed session as well, and have those discussions, have those negotiations. And again, if we disagree, we disagree, but at least we need to know that, and let's move forward. You know, this is a very important program, as Mr. Englander mentioned, and it just doesn't sound like since September we've had that type of communication we had hoped had occurred. So, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.
So just to be clear, for clarification to the city attorney, the memo will address the issue of takedowns as brought up by the Regency representative and issues as to the lease.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilman, further clarification from city attorney, what is the specific question as to the lease that you have?
Well, I'd like to... I think those questions that are specific with respect to what's going to be the impact on the takedown, right? The rules of the takedown and what comes up and what doesn't come up. I mean, the questions seem to be really straightforward yes or no questions, and I think I was at least waiting for a yes or no answer. And I appreciate when someone says we're going to reach an end result that's fair and equitable, and I obviously trust the council member's office, but we're hoping for a little more clarity and certainty on that. Clear as mud?
Well, I will consult with staff. I'm just there may be components of this that are not a legal question, so I'm a little unclear as to about what the lease question is. But I can talk to Regency's attorney as well and get clarification.
Okay, we've got a good sense of what the questions are and what we're just asking for negotiations to happen. And if we can, I don't know, the threat of litigation, you need to assess that and advise us whether we could or could not do that. If we can't, we'll come back as long as those negotiations happen, and let's discuss them.
Yes, understood.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. Next item.
Councilman, the next item is the city attorney prepare ordinance, basically to require a 1.5 importance factor for the construction of new cellular communication towers in the city to ensure seismic safety.
All right. Mr. Chair, this is an ordinance that I prepared. So this one is easy. So the mayor's office requested the city attorney's office in consultation with the building and safety department to prepare an ordinance to require freestanding cellular towers to be constructed so that they would withstand a major earthquake. My understanding is that some of the companies already do that, but perhaps not all of them. So this is a fairly straightforward change that would require that they be built according to what is called a 1.5 importance factor. And just for your information, most buildings in the city of LA, my understanding, are built according to a 1 importance factor, which means that if there is a strong enough earthquake, the cell installations that are on top of buildings would be rendered unfunctional. And so that's why it's important to have the freestanding towers that would withstand that type of earthquake. And there's also representatives...
Going forward, right?
Yes, going forward.
Okay. We have two speakers. This item is going forward. I don't know if you still wish to speak. Julia Cooksey and Kevin Tamaki from AT&T and Verizon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Sidio. I'm Julia Cooksey with Verizon. Relative to the City Attorney Report and Ordinance, we generally do not have objections to the proposed language, but would like Council to consider a streamlined permit process to mirror other critical facilities to ensure that wireless infrastructure is made more robust as quickly as possible. And second, to make our network stronger, the focus also should include helping our industry increase our generator percentage, not merely just focus on tower strength. Connectivity and power are the real issues for reliability. The strength of the tower is rarely, if ever, going to be a problem for survivability of our network. And even in hurricane areas in the U.S., it is connectivity and power that are the key issues. So I'd like to ask that the committee take these recommendations into consideration and work with the industry to incorporate the language. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin Tamaki.
Good afternoon, council members. Kevin Tamaki, AT&T. Typically, it's my job to save the company money. Obviously, this initiative will cost us more in terms of strengthening the poles. However, given the importance of public safety and keeping communications seamless, we really don't have a problem with it. I agree with my colleague from Verizon that we would like to see the council take a look at, given that these facilities are of key importance during times of natural disasters, that the council look at streamlining the permitting process. Obviously, you may know that we've had challenges in that area in trying to get some of our permits entitlements approved, but we think this is a very good opportunity to be able to look at ways to streamline the process to get those strengthened poles out in the network as soon as possible. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions, comments?
The industry's got to look at this as the investment that we're asking everybody to make. Of course, there's no value in these investments if they're not earthquake proof, right? So we need these to be earthquake proof, and we're asking everybody in the city to do it, from low-income tenants to everybody who has a building. So we're all in this together.
All right. Thank you. So we'll move this item without objection.
So you'll approve the ordinance, and as far as the request from the industry, do you want to include instruction to building and safety and planning to streamline the permitting process as part of the committee report? Or, I mean, the ordinance gets adopted, but I don't know if as a policy instruction you want to include that in the report to explore the feasibility of streamlining the permitting process.
That could mean a lot of things.
Yeah.
Let me explore that, and before we adopt it in council, if the public speakers who brought that issue up could raise that with my staff in the CLA, and we'll see if we get some language that is a bit more specific and as to what we want to accomplish with that. We're approving the ordinance. It's going to council when?
It can go in next Wednesday, sir.
I'm sorry, when was that?
Next Wednesday?
Next Wednesday, okay. And before then, we'll, if you want to contact my office, CLA will propose some language, if feasible. If feasible.
If feasible.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Next item.
Next item is item 12. It's an appeal by Steve Meyer from the action of the Central APC, which failed to act, and thereby the underlying action of the Deputy Advisory Agency to approve the tract map for 31 condo units was approved.
Staff here on this item?
12.
staff here on this item? Staff? Oh, okay, let's hear from staff on this item first, please.
Good afternoon. Lucy Ibarra with the Planning Department. Just a brief history on this case. It was filed initially in December of 2011 as a 5- and 6-story condominium with 37 units. It was subsequently reduced to 31 units and 4 and 5 stories. By right, the property would permit 57 units. There was a hearing held in March, and issues relative to the potential historic significance were raised. We asked for historic resources report, which was provided a month later, that basically asserted that the properties do not meet the criteria for designation in the National Register, the State Register, or the local City of Beverly Hills and City of LA Historic Cultural Monument, or as a district. Again, it asserted that no noteworthy characteristics of the architecture, no association with historic events or persons, that elevated these structures beyond typical representations of the Spanish colonial revival architectural style that was prevalent in the 30s. Following the submittal of that report, the City of Beverly Hills submitted a 2-page memo contesting the findings of the report, and basically cited the lots were uniform, rectangular, modest, with a consistent setback, sharing concrete walkways, detached garages, parkways, and mature jacaranda trees. Based on the whole of the record, this is insufficient to establish significance and fails to identify any historic events, persons, or identify any noteworthy architectural features of the buildings individually or as a district. The city, the advisory agency approved the project, allowing the construction of the 31 residential units. And this was raised at the Area Planning Commission. CEQA and the courts have affirmed that the lead agency is to make their determination on significance based on the preponderance of the evidence in light of the whole of the record. The memo submitted by Beverly Hills did not provide sufficient information to its cause to establish significance, and to date, following the decision and throughout the appeal process, neither the City of Beverly Hills or the appellant has submitted anything to the record that would make its case to otherwise support its argument in support of the substantial evidence test in establishing historic significance. In its latest appeal, the appellant continues to argue that a fair argument must apply, despite the fact that the evidence in the whole of the record does not support historic significance. So even if you were to apply the fair argument standard, the substantial evidence test supports that the project does not qualify for historic significance either as individual structures or as a district. And unless you have any other questions, that was the assertion of the Planning Department at the Area Planning Commission.
Great. No, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so now hear from the appellant, Steve Meyer.
Thank you. My name is Steve Mayer. I'm the appellant. I am a resident of Los Angeles. I live a stone's throw away from the subject project. As you've heard, the project itself, as you can see in the supplement on pages 4 and 5, there are photos, as well as a panorama. This is a project which is partly in Beverly Hills, partly in Los Angeles. 30% of the units are in Beverly Hills, or will be, the rest in Los Angeles. The contention is very simple. It is not believed that the Department of Planning properly assessed all the various factors. The architect on 336, and probably also 334, was the first woman architect licensed in Los Angeles. She's prominent. She's featured in 5 different Department of Planning documents. She was also architect of a historical synagogue on Hoover Street. It's not as though she's just someone who just happened to buy. The arguments which have been provided by the applicant is that there's a 70% threshold. When the the consultant provided a second report, they expanded the district from 9 properties as the City of Beverly Hills designed to 12 properties. Thereby, the 70% threshold would be violated. if they wish to tore down the aspect. Another aspect here which is important to note, which is also in the supplement, is that the LA CEQA handbook specifies for city-sponsored projects located outside the city boundaries, city departments conducting CEQA review must consider the local environmental setting as well as applicable regulations and policies and determine if another set of criteria applies or is more appropriate. The city of Beverly Hills is very interested in this project. Just today we received a communication from one of the council members who requested more information as to, and she was one of the ones who had, in February, the city council had actually considered whether to join in on the appeal, but at that point they did not. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry, what was that?
Do you have any questions?
No, I had no questions. Okay, thank you. Now the owners, Elia Thompson and Jonathan Riker.
Hi, good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm Elia Thompson. I'm with the law firm of Sklar Kirsch. I represent the owner and the applicant. I'm joined by my colleague, Jonathan Riker. One of the reasons we had a rare decision to have two lawyers come to this is that Jonathan is a CEQA expert. So if we do have particular CEQA questions, I wanted him to be on hand because he is a CEQA expert. Again, my name is Elia Thompson. I'm a land use attorney, and I've been working with this owner for quite some time. And I want to simply make a few things very clear. Number one, my client hired a very reputable historic architect to do this report. This report, as you look through it, is between 60 and 65 pages. She went through an intense amount of scrutiny on these three projects, on these three property sites. She looked at every single element of the architecture that could possibly be looked at, including the history, the people involved in these properties, both owners, architects, designers, engineers, everything. It is incredibly thorough. Furthermore, Pam O'Connor is an incredibly not only well-known historian and architect herself, historic architect herself, but she's also the mayor of Santa Monica. She's a very conservative historian, and she does not say things like this project has no historic significance whatsoever and would not be an historic district lightly or very often. I'd like to point out a couple of things. The argument seems to hinge on this idea that everything that's been done to date is somehow lacking and that more environmental review should be required. But let me point out to you that the only issue in front of you is the potential historic issue. We have done a traffic report, even though we are only talking of the addition of 14 units. Because initially the City of Beverly Hills said that their only issue was traffic. We did a full traffic report. Since then, it's clear to both cities that there's no potential traffic issue. So the historic report that we did is exactly the level of detail, the level of environmental review that would be required in an EIR. An EIR would simply repackage this and string this out in a much longer period of time to allow various comment periods. But at the end of the day, the amount of intense research that has gone into the package that I've shared with you, and if anyone doesn't have a package, let me know. I have a couple of extras. That's exactly what would be required in an EIR. So I'd like to leave it at that, and just, if I could, reserve the rest of my time if there are any other questions or needs that you feel I need to address, then I'll address them at that time.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Riker, are you going to speak on this as well, or?
I'd just like to reserve my time for rebuttal if there's CEQA questions.
Well, I know you're a lawyer, and we usually don't have rebuttals here. Your time is called. It's time to speak, but unless we have questions, we can ask you if that's kind of.
Yeah, I'll speak for a minute. My name is Jonathan Riker with Sklar Kirsch as well, and yeah, just if you have any questions regarding the CEQA issues, I'm here to answer and help you.
Well, thank you.
Now, that would be great.
Yeah, upon this interaction, I may consider creating a rebuttal and placeholder in the future for public speakers. So, thank you. Just got to set a policy and be consistent if we change it. Jim McQuiston, Robert Block.
Jim McQuiston. My statement, I think you all have, is very short and sweet. The problem is that we're supposed to have a certain amount of housing available in the city by state law, and we've gotten up our plans accordingly, and we're not doing what our plans say. We always come in and say, well, look, this development is going to be less than we're allowed on this development. Well, we've done this over and over and over again, so now we're short of development space. And this one is another big hole in our development on the west side. On the west side, that means we're going to have to start tearing down some of the houses on the east side to make up for that. That's what the law says. You have to do that. I think what we have to do is say, look, the law says this is R4. You're supposed to fill the maximum, not 31.
Thank you. Robert Black, and afterwards is Christopher Hammond.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Robert Block. I live at 339 North Oakhurst Drive. The appellant had just received this particular document from his attorney and asked if I pass it around. In the interest of time, I'll just summarize it real briefly. I'll summarize it louder and briefly. SEQA requires an EIR whenever a project may have a significant impact on the environment. She states various ordinances and laws. I won't go into that. There is a low threshold requirement for an EIR that reflects a preference for resolving doubts in favor of environmental review when the question is whether any such review is warranted. The low threshold triggers preparation of an EIR whenever substantial evidence supports a fair argument that significant impacts may occur regardless of contrary evidence. Substantial evidence provided by the City of Beverly Hills asserts that demolitions proposed for this project would have significant impacts on a National Register eligible historic district. Beverly Hills requests an EIR to fully assess and disclose the project's impacts and to identify any mitigations or project alternatives that can eliminate or reduce the project impacts. Thank you.
Thank you. Christopher Hammond, Adrian Scott Fine.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Council members. My name is Chris Hammond. I'm a resident of the street in question. I'm at 347 North Oakhurst. I just wanted to say that there's a clear evidence in the record that 332 to 336 Oakhurst have been identified as contributing structures to a National Register eligible historic district. And my point is that I just feel that the City of LA, as a resident, need to do kind of the right thing and require an EIR to truly evaluate this project properly. I just wanted to urge the committee to recommend promoting this appeal. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Adrian Scott Fine, then Noah Holstein.
Good afternoon, Adrian Scott Fine with the Los Angeles Conservancy, and we're here to urge the committee to recommend granting this appeal. The problem the city is facing is that the structures have been identified as potential historic resources as part of a small and 100% intact potential historic district. As proposed, there is a significant impact as approximately more than 30% of the historic district will be demolished through this proposed project, jeopardizing the district's eligibility in the future. When there is an adverse impact like this, CEQA is clear. It requires the preparation of an EIR in this case and the consideration of preservation alternatives and or mitigation measures. Recent survey work conducted as part of the citywide survey for the City of Beverly Hills identified North Oakhurst Drive as a National and California Register eligible historic district. A brief assessment by the Historic Resources Group further clarifies and supports this. Again, CEQA sets a low threshold. It's upheld through case law, and you also have that stated before you with the memo from the attorney Susan Brandt Hawley. If substantial and compelling evidence is submitted into the record, again known as the fair argument standard, you have to go through the process of looking at EIR and preservation alternatives. For all those measures, we certainly urge you to support this appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. Noah Molstein.
Good afternoon, council members. Noah Molstein, Planning Deputy, Councilmember Paul Koretz's office. Our office has been working with the applicant and the community on this for quite some time, and initially we had heard from the community that there were some light concerns regarding potential historical significance of this property. So it was our office's request that the applicant conduct this historical survey. After doing so, determining that the site does not have any historical attributes that would otherwise be jeopardized if demolished, the City of Beverly Hills came back with just a 3-page, rebuttal to, rebutting Kaplan-Shin-Kaplan's extensive survey. Just knowing that my boss is a big preservation buff, and his original inclination was really to make the applicant do an EIR to settle this, the dispute. After just reviewing both City of Beverly Hills' comments and the Kaplan-Shin-Kaplan report, our office has determined that we just don't see how any new historical evidence would be created that would otherwise, swing this to maybe potentially be historical or deem this historical, have historical significance. So, our office, finds it really hard to support this appeal. So, we're going to request that the committee deny the appeal and uphold the initial determination by the advisory agency. Okay. Any questions?
No questions. Any questions? No questions. Thank you. Thank you so much. And what's before us today is the historical significance. Any other CEQA item?
Well, what you have before you is the MND.
The MND?
Yeah. And the appeal as to the track map.
Okay. And the appeal of the track map itself, was it directed at the historical?
The central APC deadlocked or failed to act, and thereby the underlying action, which was the approval of the track map by the advisory agency, was sustained.
Good. And but the underlying question to all of this is the historical significance. And to the planning staff again, if you could summarize just your conclusions on this.
Sure. Given the controversy relative to the historic issue, I just want to add two things. In 2011, the City of Beverly Hills deferred lead agency status to the City of LA. In that file, they included a letter basically not only giving us lead agency status, but citing that their only concern relative to the environmental review is traffic. Together in the file of the original 2011 case that was filed, they also submitted some conceptual approval of the design. No mention of historic analysis or protection was mentioned. In other subsequent letters that are also in the file, there was also, there was a letter about the pending review that City of Beverly Hills would have to do subsequent to the City of LA's process. No mention of historic status or historic significance was mentioned. With respect to Mr. Mayor's comments on the architect, Edith Norton, she is a female architect in the State of LA. She began her career in multifamily residential developments, but is better known for her work on, I think, with the Army Corps, like in some warehouse hangars, and also for the Union Oil Company. The historic architectural report and the requirement for an EIR, again, as the attorney for the applicant stated, the evidence would be the same. As I mentioned before, no additional evidence from the City of Beverly Hills or the appellant has been submitted to augment their argument that there's substantial evidence in favor of significance. They only keep mentioning the fair argument standard, but that only follows the substantial evidence. And again, as I mentioned, the evidence in the record supports that there's nothing necessarily noteworthy about these structures, either at a local or historic or national level. They keep mentioning that this particular district is eligible for national registry, but the city of Beverly Hills has no district within its boundaries to date. They have no historic district. I fail to understand how this particular area would rise to the level of national registration. There was a comment about the 100% of the buildings on North Oakhurst. That is incorrect. Only 9, maybe 10 of the structures on one side of the street have the same characteristics as the subject site, and only 2 buildings on the other side of the street, I should say, so the east side of the street, 9 of the 11 buildings would qualify. But on the city of Beverly Hills side of the street, where all the properties are within Beverly Hills, only 2 of those properties have the same characteristics. They've redeveloped the remaining side of that street. So to say that 9 or 10 on one side and 2 on the other side constitutes 100% of North Oakhurst isn't accurate.
Thank you. And there's potentially historic sites, and would you say that they exist on both the City of LA site and Beverly Hills? Or?
I don't say they're potentially historic. I just said that they share the characteristics of these structures.
Okay. But are there any potentially historic sites?
There is one building that is built by an architect that is on the list of recognized architects for the City of Beverly Hills, but does not include the structures of this project.
Thank you. And in terms of the M&D versus an EIR, we see this often in this committee in terms of difference between doing an M&D and an EIR. And why would you say we did an M&D here, not an EIR?
Well, the M&D is based on the baseline. So the baseline being that at the current environmental setting of the properties. So they weren't identified as historic. They have not been to say that a recent survey that was briefly done it doesn't rise to the level of providing significance, only that, additional information is necessary to make that assessment. And with the information we have with respect to the historic resources report that was provided twice by the same applicant, by the same consultant, Kaplan, basically provides the information necessary to make that determination. And as I mentioned, the information would be the same whether it was in an M&D or an EIR.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, with that and with the recommendation of the local council office and staff recommendation, I would move to deny the appeal and deny the appeal.
And sustain the Deputy Advisory Agency's approval of the track map and adopt the M&D.
Okay, thank you. No objection on that? No objection, so ordered. And this item will be in council when? On Wednesday? Next Wednesday?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, okay, thank you. Anything else on the agenda?
Item 13 is the weekly report from planning.
We will note and file that.
Okay, and public comment?
There's no public comment cards. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.